G'day, I'm Tim Thompson, and today I am in the middle of Sydney at the Stony Range Botanic Gardens in the Shire of Warringah to talk about agriculture. No, I haven't gone insane. Let's find out about an amazing young person who has been running a business in ag since he was 14 years of age. He was employing people when he was 16. It makes you wonder what you've done with your life. Let's go and find out more. Isaac Mayer, how are you, sir?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Oh, I'm absolutely thrilled to be spending a bit of time with you. You are absolutely kicking goals. How old are you now?
I'm 19.
You're 19 now, but you've been at this since you were 14.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you actually got your first bees at 12.
That's right, yes.
And you've been running a business since you were 14, and you've been employing people since you were 16.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me a little bit about what you're doing, because you're an apiarist, but you're not dealing so much with European bees. You've got a few of those colonies. You're specialising in native bees.
Yeah, so I specialise in Australian native stingless bees, one of the most common native bees that we have in Australia, and at the moment I'm looking after around about 100 hives of them here in Sydney and all the way up until Brisbane in Queensland.
Now, you own some of those hives, and some of those hives you actually paid a contract service to look after.
That's right.
And you've got quite a unique business model, haven't you? So tell me a little bit about the business of Australian native bees.
Yeah, so there's a few different ways that you can make money with native bees. I focus mostly on services, so I help other people with keeping bees, but they do also produce honey, they do produce beeswax, and there's a number of products that you can make from those.
Now, you've got a number of corporate clients who are trying to achieve sustainability goals by incorporating beehives into the gardens around their buildings, and they're paying you to look after those hives every year.
That's
is that correct?
Yeah, so companies are realising that pollination is very important, and when you have a bee that is particularly good at pollinating native plants, that just ticks a lot of boxes for a lot of people.
Now, Australian native bees are also very good at pollinating some commercial crops, aren't they? What are some of the commercial crops that they're really good at pollinating?
So they're currently being used for macadamias, avocados, mangoes, and being trialled for a number of other crops, and they're showing really good results.
Now, there's also some exciting research you were telling me about off camera being done in the tomato industry, because at the moment it costs something like $25,000 a hectare to pollinate tomatoes when they're grown indoors, but there are some Australian native bees that are showing promise to actually do that for free.
That's right, yeah. So some Australian native bees are capable of buzz pollination, which is what's required to pollinate tomato plants.
Yep.
So although it probably won't be free because someone will have to breed those bees.
You?
Maybe me, maybe not. It'll definitely be a lot cheaper than paying a person to manually go and pollinate each tomato flower.
And that's the impact, I suppose. We always talk about the importance of bees in agriculture and our landscape in general, but when you can actually quantify it in terms of tomato production, you know that it's costing $25,000 a hectare to do the job that bees do literally for free.
Yeah, for field tomatoes, that's right.
It's quite remarkable when you start to think about those numbers throughout all of our different crops. Okay, so why native bees? Why not European?
I'm personally a big fan of native bees because they're stingless. They're a lot easier to work with. In my experience, they're very docile, and they also just don't have as many diseases, pests and diseases. They're resistant to the varroa mite, which has been an issue in Australia recently.
Because we're up in the middle of New South Wales. We're right near some of the varroa
it's very
zones.
Close. Yeah.
You actually had some hives in some of those areas, but because they're Australian native bees, you were allowed to remove them because they can't carry the varroa mite.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, so it's quite a good backup plan, I suppose.
Absolutely. So
for the bee industry.
in situations where honeybees might be in a biological lockdown, for example, as they were last year, growers might be able to potentially turn towards other pollinators like native bees to help fill that gap.
Now, native bees won't deliver the same volume of honey as European bees, will they?
That's right. They're much smaller, as you might be able to see. So they produce about 1 kilogram of honey a year, 500 grams to a kilogram, which is 100 of what a honeybee hive could produce in a
So a
good year.
honeybee hive, 100 kilos, native beehive 1 kilo, let's just say for argument's sake. And there will be people commenting already that we got our numbers wrong, but that is the difference. It's 100 to 1.
Yeah.
But native bee honey has a very interesting and peculiar and unusual taste.
Yeah.
And people pay a lot more for it.
It's very unique. There's also lots of research going on at the moment about potential medicinal qualities. Nothing's finalised, but it's showing really promising results similar to Manuka honey. And so for those reasons, and also due to its rarity, obviously, not many people keep native bees and they produce so little. It's costing about $500 a kilogram.
Now, when we have a look inside that hive, it's not like the typical honeycomb structure that I've come to expect from bees when they're on a frame and you have that perfect honeycomb. This is more like a forest, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's kind of like you've gone to another planet, and you've got these little vessels that you can pop with your finger that contain these beautiful, gorgeous little parcels of honey in them.
That's right, yeah. So they use a sort of grape-like structure, so they almost look like little grapes.
Yep.
And they'll fill those structures with either pollen or honey, whatever they need at the time. And that'll allow them to store those food sources for a really long period of time. So then when winter comes and it's a bit too cold for them to leave the hive and collect those foods, they can just use up their resources.
So collecting the honey from a native beehive would, I imagine, be a lot more complex process than it is from a European hive where you simply scrape it off into a bucket.
Yeah, so in its purest form, the ideal best practice of harvesting from native bees, because of the pot structure, is using a syringe.
Right.
And that is a very
So it's literally
labour.
going in there and syringing it out.
It takes a really long time. It's very expensive.
And you wouldn't take it all, I imagine, because they need some.
So you definitely need to leave at least some for them.
Yep.
The way that a lot of beekeepers do it is, so usually we have 2 boxes in a hive, and if you want to start harvesting honey, we add an extra box on top, and then all the honey in that extra box.
Same as European bees.
We call it a super as well. So it's the same name across the bee species, and a very similar sort of thinking in that regard.
And so you just take that one box and pop all them, and you know that there are other vessels down below that will keep the hive going.
So there's special tools which we call it a bed of nails, and it's quite literally that. And you just use that to pierce all the pots and drain it all out.
So Isaac, if people are wanting to get into native bees, there's a couple of different hive designs. I'm struck straight away by how much smaller and obviously more convenient they are to a European hive. What's the cost of entry?
So typically you'll buy a hive that includes the box and all the bees inside and all the structure and honey.
Yep.
And that'll set you back about $500 to $600.
Right, so that's fairly cheap when you're talking beehives. And you're obviously not going to need all of the suits and everything else.
Don't need a suit. You don't really need any tools unless you're planning on doing something specific with it, like harvesting honey.
Yep.
But it is definitely possible to keep these bees with nothing other than the hive.
But they do need a bit of maintenance, don't they? Because they can suffer from mould and a few other things.
Yeah, they do have some issues. They do have some pests.
Yep.
The major thing that we really focus on with native bees is the position. That's probably the most important thing you can do to look after it.
So where we are here in dappled filtered light is an ideal position?
Yeah, so ideally we say we want morning sun and afternoon shade. So that means in winter they still get a bit of a wake up in the morning, but during summer they don't get the really hot 2 o'clock afternoon sun.
Yeah, they don't get
because that can
fried
cause
inside
issues.
the box.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, right, okay. So if you're wanting to set up a hive to collect honey, we've got obviously 2 boxes here, and you would put a 3rd box on top as your super and only collect from the 3rd box.
That's exactly right, yeah.
Okay, how many bees would typically be in one of these hives?
About 5,000 to 10,000.
Inside that box?
Inside that box, yeah.
That is incredible. You think about the amount of insects going out and pollinating plants every day. That's quite a huge amount of effort.
Exactly.
So these little guys are no good for Victoria. You can't import them into WA because of quarantine restrictions, but they're spread from the Northern Territory right down the east coast and a few in Alice Springs as well.
That's right. There are also some in the northern end of Western Australia, but it's a bit of an isolated pocket.
So if people are wanting to get into native bees, what should they do? Who should they contact? How should they do it?
So I would recommend getting in touch with either Sydney stingless bees if you're in Sydney, or sugar bag bees if you're pretty much anywhere else.
Yes.
Those are 2 very reputable suppliers, and they often have a wait list for hives because it's very popular at the moment.
Yep.
But you have a 12-month guarantee from those vendors of a healthy hive, which is very important.
Now Isaac, this native beehive here is how most people would find native bees, isn't it? Growing in a hollow log or even a Telstra pit or some sort of service pit. And you actually, with your club, get a lot of rescue calls. You go out and rescue hives from people that want to spray them with Bagon.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so obviously if you find a hive like this and you don't want it or it seems damaged, I would definitely recommend contacting your local bee club. In Sydney we have the Sydney Native Bee Community, and there's local clubs everywhere.
I'm just amazed as we're watching these little bees, the number of bees that are going in with huge pouches of pollen on their legs. Like they're just collecting a huge amount of pollen, aren't they, in the middle of winter in suburban Sydney. It would be such a shame to ruin a little colony like this. Now, some people, Isaac, might be tempted if they find a native bee hive like this somewhere out and about in their travels to actually break the hive apart, grab the bees and put them into a hive to take home. Now, you wouldn't recommend that?
Definitely not. If the hive is in a safe log and it's not damaged, then I would 100% recommend leaving it there. We should always leave them in their natural habitat. In fact, it is very illegal to take them from protected areas like national parks.
So you should always get your bees from a breeder?
Yeah.
Or from a rescue?
A genuine rescue,
if it's a genuine rescue and they're in a dangerous place.
That's right, yeah.
Thank you for showing us these amazing creatures and having a chat about another alternative for agriculture in this age of varroa mite concerns that we're living through at the moment. They're not the solution everywhere and they're not the solution for everything, but there's some exciting research coming even in the area of growing hydroponic tomatoes, which is well worth keeping an eye on. And they make a fantastic addition to any garden, which is why one of your business models is actually looking after the native bees in these botanic gardens.
Yeah.
Who would have thought that you could farm in the middle of Sydney? Well done, mate.
Thank you very much.
Good on you. Guys, if you like this kind of content, don't forget, hit the subscribe button, give it a thumbs up. Plenty more on timthompson.ag. And let's get some native bees going, I reckon. Now, these guys are collecting a lot of pollen at the moment, aren't they, Isaac?
They are, yeah.
But you were saying that there's also, I should be looking for clear drops of tree resin on their legs as well. They don't just collect pollen, they get honey from other sources.
That's right. Well, it's not actually used to make honey. You would have noticed that the hive itself is made of a much darker material.
Yes.
That's because native bees mix their beeswax with tree resins, which are often orange or red in colour, and that gives it its really distinctive brownish colour of the hive. So yeah, if you see that on their hind legs, that's also where they store their tree resins when they're coming back to the hive.
So you've got them not only going out and foraging for food, but construction materials as well.
Exactly.
Clever little bees.
Yeah, it saves them from having to make all the wax themselves. And it also has antimicrobial benefits. So you'll notice around the entrance they've got a lot of propolis, and they use that as a bit of an antimicrobial doormat to wipe their feet and get rid of any germs.